week I came from
Okay,
the
Boker
US.
Tov, everybody. Let's begin with a blessing. Here, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Today we're going to continue studying the next chapter. We're talking about Kiddush Hashem, or sanctifying the name of God. Last week we talked a little bit about the third commandment and Kiddush Hashem from the perspective of not using or saying or taking the name of God in vain. If you remember, we discussed that last week. And today we're going to talk a little bit about martyrs and giving your life for the name of God. And this has been an issue or a topic that started from the very beginning of the Jewish people. When we started as a people, people were willing to give up their lives to sanctify the name of God. And people were, willing to fight for their lives in order to sanctify the name of God. So the way that Rabbi Telushkin put together this chapter is he has a very interesting historical perspective of it. And he's going to bring here some stories from the ancient Jewish world, meaning from the beginning of the Jewish people, connected to this idea of martyrology, so in the ancient world, then in the Middle Ages, then during the Holocaust, and then a 20th century story of so I would like to, and there are a number of stories that are connected to the different periods, but I would like to take one of each because we don't have enough time to cover all the stories that are here, but we're going to choose one of each of these periods. So the first question is, what would you be willing to sacrifice your life for?
Not God.
Not God?
Not me.
Not for you.
Me, no.
Okay.
Your children?
Your children? Okay. You would give up your life for your children? What
Your
else?
spouse, your country.
Your country? Would you give up your life for your country? Okay. Your country, your family? It's a very tough question, right? Because we know from a Jewish perspective that life is the most valuable thing that we have, right? And actually, we shouldn't be giving up our lives according to Jewish tradition. There are only 3 mitzvot that are called Yehareg Be'al Ya'avor, right? So only 3 mitzvot that you should give up your life and not violate those 3 commandments. And that's it. Shvichut Damim, meaning killing somebody else, Avodah Zarah, idolatry, and Gilui Arayot, incest.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so those are the 3 mitzvot. But for example, if someone comes up to you and says, I'm going to kill you, or if you don't eat this piece of pork, I'll kill you, okay, kill me. Or you have to observe Shabbat, you have to violate Shabbat, or I'll kill you, okay, kill me. But those are the 3 mitzvot, the 3 that I mentioned, that you should give up your life. So that was in the time of the Talmud. The question is, would we be willing to sacrifice our lives for modern forms of idolatry or shvichut damim, or killing somebody else, or incest? Right. So that's a modern question that we should
that
be.
Incest was the third one. I find that fascinating.
Why?
That was a concern of theirs.
Yeah.
That was a worry.
Maybe it was more common.
Jim, there's a chair for you.
Why is it?
Yeah, you can sit there.
It's it also has to do with propagation of the tribe.
Yeah, and we know that incest and sexual laws were on the foundation of any society, right? And Freud says that's the very beginning of any society that you would like to build up.
But I think it's interesting. Well, the only thing that I'm aware of historically is that, in the Middle Ages especially, when you were marrying so young and then the bride was brought into the home of her spouse, that everybody was so young that there was a lot of sexual tension, and that that was. But earlier on, I wouldn't have even imagined that was an issue.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
in the time
Yeah.
of the Talmud.
Yeah.
That's fascinating.
Or in the time of the Bible,
Be a tough guy.
when they had kids at age 90.
Yeah. So let's take a quick look to the
But tell me, didn't,
to the
Rabbi
sources and the
Akiva
stories that are here. Say it again.
Isn't Rabbi Akiva died on
That's the
Kiddush?
story.
Yep, that's the story that we are going to study and analyze today. Well, so Rabbi Telushkin brings a number of stories here from the ancient world, where people were willing to sacrifice their lives for Kiddush Hashem, or to sanctify God's name. You can see here the very, very famous story of Hannah and her sons, Hannah Veshiva Vanea. You know that she was willing to sacrifice her life and the life of her children. And you see here,
But that's not in the Torah, is it?
no, it's not in the Torah. No. It says here, Hannah, whose 7 sons were murdered by the Syrian emperor Antiochus for refusing to worship idols. Right, so that's a very well-known story. But as Yael said, probably the most well-known story from the time of the Talmud, there are 2 stories that we actually read them, or we mention them on Yom Kippur. You know, this whole service of Yom Kippur is built up from many different layers and many different historical components, right? So you have the very ancient part from the Torah, ancient part from the prophets, but then you have parts from the Talmud, and then the martyrology was added to the service, and Seder HaAvodah, how the priest would perform the Yom Kippur ritual in the time of the temple, and then you have some modern readings, right? So this idea of the martyrology was also included on Yom Kippur, the most sacred day of the year. And there we read these 2 stories that we are going to study today. One is about Rabbi Akiva, as you said, and the other one is Hanania ben Taradion, who was also willing, and we call them the 10 Aseret Harugei Malchut, the 10 rabbis or the 10 scholars or sages that gave up their lives because they...
In dreadful ways, by the way.
Yeah, but Malchut there is Rome, the Roman Empire, which was very, very cruel to the Jewish people, right? And so they were willing to give up their lives in order to sanctify the name of God when the Romans were ruling the land of Israel.
Was the martyrology service just a recent addition to the Montessori?
No, it's from the Middle Ages.
I remember it as a kid.
From the Middle Ages.
Well,
No.
it was the Middle Ages. Well,
No, you know, maybe because in your shul they skipped it, or they didn't include it. Some synagogues, they just skip the avodah and they skip the martyrology and they skip, you know, some of the.
Anything in this.
What I never understood, I never understood about that. I know I don't want to interrupt your train of thought. It was involuntary. What they did to them was involuntary.
What do you mean?
To the rabbis.
Yeah.
This one was flayed. This one, all the things, but it was involuntary. They didn't really have any decision. It wasn't a question of exercising free will. They had no choice. So how
Well,
do I
but
get
they purposely were breaking the laws that the Romans set. The Romans said you cannot study Torah, and we know we're going to read now that Rabbi Hanania ben Taradion purposely was studying Torah, you know, in public, so he knew that he was breaking the law. So that was his free will.
Yeah.
Okay.
That was his free will. The same with Rabbi Akiva. Right? Okay, so let's take, the texts are interesting, so let's take a quick look to the text here. Page 320 on the bottom, you see Rabbi Akiva. Debbie, you want to read? Go ahead.
Rabbi Akiva, who was publicly tortured to death by the Romans in 135 CE, was the most famous of all Jewish martyrs to die with the words Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad on his lips. Akiva had helped inspire Bar Kokhba's anti-Roman revolt and had continued teaching Torah after the Romans made it a capital offense to do so.
Right, so we can discuss, was that right or not? I mean, when the government or this Roman Empire tells you, don't do this, and if you do this, I'll kill you, and you go and you publicly do it, are you doing the right thing or not? Right, so what is the line? When do you cross the line or not? And clearly, studying Torah was not one of these 3 mitzvot that I mentioned to you. Right, so there is an obligation of study Torah, But apparently, you shouldn't be giving up your life for the study of the Torah. But at the same time, Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Hanania ben Taradion, they understood that if they ceased studying Torah, the Torah would disappear.
But for him, studies doesn't mean that he sit alone and study. He teach.
He taught Torah.
So it's big different if you teach to the new generation
Right.
versus you do it for yourself.
Right, right. And we know that Rabbi Akiva had many, many students, right? You remember Lag BaOmer, we always read these 24,000 students of Rabbi Akiva. So he was a very prolific teacher. And so the question is, where's the limit, right? Would you give up your life for the study of Torah? And listen, towards the end of the class, we're going to read about Natan Sharansky, right, who lived in Russia. And he also put his life at risk.
Yeah.
Right. So where is the limit? Where would you draw the line where your life is more important than your religion?
Does it ever say the people who were studying with him when he was taken away, were they killed also?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So isn't he really endangering all their
Correct.
lives?
Yep.
Not just making a decision for
Yep.
himself?
Mm-hmm.
But
But they're-
idea
But they're
was
making
that
the decision
They're
also
not
to
so
study.
To study with
Study,
him.
I know, but
if
still,
they would
he's
not
giving them-
study, they would stop being Jewish in practicality because the
They
Roman
wouldn't
were
know.
very hostile against studying, practicing Judaism.
Yeah. And we know that what the Romans wanted was to stop Jews from their Judaism and to convert to their pagan faith or religion that they were starting. So they asked Jews to stop following the Shabbat, right? To stop keeping the Shabbat, to stop doing the Brit Milah, to stop studying Torah, to stop ordain rabbis. There is another story about this rabbi who ordained other rabbis and was killed as well, right? So it was a very, very tough time, and this is one of the most well-known stories about Rabbi Akiva. So let's take a quick.
When Rabbi Akiva was taken out for execution, it was the time to recite the morning Shema, and as he did so, literally took upon himself the yoke of heaven. The Romans flayed his skin with iron combs. His disciples said to him, "Our teacher, even at this point you continue to recite the Shema." He said to them, "All my life I've been troubled by the verse in the first paragraph of the Shema, which says, 'You shall love the Lord your God with all your soul,' which I understood as meaning, even if he takes your soul." I asked myself, when shall I have the opportunity to fulfill this verse? Now that I have this opportunity, shall I not fulfill it?
Right, so the Shema Israel says, "Ve'ahavta et Hashem Elohecha bechol levavcha," with all your heart, "bechol nafshecha," with all your soul, "bechol me'odecha," with all your might or strength. So the traditional interpretation in the Talmud is bechol levavcha, with all your heart, right? So try to direct your service or your heart to God, bechol nafshecha, with all your soul, and chol meodecha, with all your strength. So they understand it as all your monetary resources, right? So give tzedakah and try to donate to good causes. But Rabbi Akiva was troubled with this verse, with this idea of your soul. How do you understand serving God with all your soul? So he said, even when God is taking, or when your soul is departing from you, you should serve God. And he's about to die. So his soul is departing. He's saying to his students, now is the time to do it. And what? I am not going to say the Shema Israel. Right? So even today, religious people, before they died, or some people that know this text, they would say, if they are capable of, they would say the Shema Israel. And actually, if you are not capable of doing it, a relative or a rabbi who stands next to you before you died should recite the vidui, which is a confession that you say, God, forgive me for all my sins, and then you would recite the Shema Israel. The Shema Israel. So even today, and it's based on this idea that when God is taking your soul, you would praise God and you would say the Shema Israel. Okay. Let's take a look. I said one of each, but this one is good from Hanania ben Taradion, which is the next one. The Talmud tells of another
The
rabbi.
Talmud tells of another rabbi whom the Romans executed about the same time. Rabbi Hanania ben Taradion was found by the Romans studying Torah, publicly holding gatherings of pupils and keeping a scroll of the Torah next to his heart. They wrapped him in the scroll, placed bundles of branches around him, and set it on fire. Then they brought tufts of wool that had been soaked in water and placed them near his heart so that he should not die quickly.
So horrible. The Romans were just horrible.
His disciple called out to him, Rabbi, what do you see? He answered, the parchment of the Torahs are being burned, but the letters are soaring on high. Open your mouth so that the fire will penetrate you, they answered. He answered, let him who gave me my soul take it away, but no one should injure himself.
So what's the idea here of the parchments of the Torah are being burned, but the letters are soaring high, or they're returning to God? Why did he say that? What do you think?
The words
What's
were
the
more-
analogy here?
The words were more important than the paper was written on.
Good. And I would say
I
that
have a lithograph of that
Oh,
image
do you?
of
Yeah.
the words leaving the Torah.
yeah, and I would say that the words are eternal. So I feel like he's saying, you know what? You can burn as many Torahs as you want. You can burn as many people as you want. But the letters are eternal. And the same letters that were given to Moses back then at Mount Sinai are the same letters that we follow today and are the same letters that the Jewish people are going to follow in the future. Now, why did he use this analogy? Probably you remember the Midrash about Moses coming down from Mount Sinai with the two tablets. And when he broke the tablets, there is a Midrash which says that the tablets, the stones were broken, but the letters returned to God. And that's the reason why the tablets became so heavy, because the covenant was ended and the letters returned to God, and the stones became very heavy for Moses to carry them. So probably what he's saying is that I am the new Moses, or I'm reinvigorating, or I'm recommitting myself to this covenant between God, Moses, and the Jewish people.
There were a couple of Jewish camps in the Malibu area, Jewish camps.
Right, I told you,
And,
right.
you know,
Yeah.
they were able to save the Torahs before
Right.
80 or so of their buildings were destroyed by
Yeah.
the fire.
Right. It's horrible. It's horrible. Okay, let's take a look to the Middle Ages. You
And
know,
yes, though, what does the next line mean?
yeah,
Let
where?
him who gave me soul take it away, but no one should injure himself.
Where's that?
It's
last-
right after
yeah, the
open
last
your
in
mouth
this
so
one,
the
this
fire
one.
will penetrate you. Let him who gave me my soul take it away, but no one should injure himself. Does that mean, like, don't try to protect me?
Or don't try to hasten my death, right? So God will decide when it's the time for me to die.
Well, that's the first part, but what about the second part? But no one should injure himself.
Injure himself to rescue him.
That's what I'm
Mhm.
asking.
Yeah.
I think.
That's the
So-
way I understand it.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So don't put your life at risk
Right.
to save me.
But don't stop studying Torah either.
Right. Right. Continue studying Torah. Yeah. How do you understand it, Maureen? Do
No,
you
I
understand
agree
the
with
same
that.
way?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Like, but in other words, don't injure yourself on my personal account.
Mhm.
But then you're still obligated to make your own decision about whether you would put yourself in the same position
Correct.
as I put myself.
Correct. Correct. Yeah. Now let's jump to the Middle Ages, the 14th century. This is a story from the Black Death. It's interesting, the introduction here. But by the way, Jews were persecuted horribly during the time of the Middle Ages. And it was not only about the Crusades at the beginning, and it was not only about Christians killing Jews and blaming them for diseases and for killing Christian children, but everywhere, Jews that lived apart from the society were persecuted and killed. And it was a horrible, horrible time. And some Jews said, you know what, I'm willing to give up my life for the sanctification of the name of God. Al-Kiddush Hashem. Following the footsteps of Rabbi Akiva and the other sages in the Talmud, some Jews in the Middle Ages said, I am going to follow that same pattern or that same idea or
But
inspiration.
then the Jewish people will lose all the leadership. If they're all willing to die,
Yeah.
then who would lead?
I don't think that they were all willing to die, but
No, but many important people. take all the rabbis in Fairfield. It will be suddenly
We'd be
sheep
rabbi-less.
without shepherds.
Rabbi-less. Okay, let's take a look to the
Rabbi, what I don't
introduction.
understand here, and I never have understood this, is the business of you convert or you die. If the Jews are so bad, why'd they want them to convert? What's
Convert
the
to
mentality?
Christianity.
Because it will be good.
Because that's
Oh,
a
because-
soul for God. That's a huge,
Right.
that's a huge mitzvah for them to get somebody to accept Jesus. That's
In
huge.
135 C, oh, that was the common area as opposed to BC. Never mind.
It has to do with who is the real Israel and with whom God sealed his covenant. Did he God seal the covenant with the original or with the with the first Jews, or did God seal the covenant with the new Jews or the church? So what the Christians believe is that the New Testament or the New Covenant is the real one, and everyone should accept Jesus as God.
But they don't denounce the Old Testament. They accept it.
Yeah, they
and
accept it,
just
but
build
it is
from
a new.
there
It's
on.
a new. It's
Yeah.
a new covenant. It's a new covenant.
And there are churches that are called New Covenant.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So what is not clear to you from that?
I think
It's almost hypocritical.
Why?
That's just how I feel about it.
if we're so bad, why would they
Yeah,
want
why
us?
they want us?
Because they
Because that
convert
will
us
make
to
you
be
good.
good.
But
Okay,
yeah,
well,
but
that's-
but the evangelicals support Israel because they believe in the end the Jews will convert and then
Mhm.
it'll be the end of time and the
Yep.
Messiah will be here again.
Well, they're nothing but 100% hypocritical.
Yeah, but it's a source of it's a sort of a transformation. You know, when you start believing in Jesus, Jesus will save your soul, and you will be saved. So that's the idea, regardless of what was your previous religion or belief. Which is not
Okay.
now. I think that today we live in a whole different setting, right? And I think that today we are more open to different religions. But back then, in the Middle Ages, this was a very strong belief.
At that time, they did not save the Jews in any situation.
Right.
Jews were bad; they deserve whatever. All of your theory is not. It does not apply
Yeah.
today.
There were these public hearings, you know, or these public gatherings where a rabbi would come and the pope or a priest would come and they would challenge each other. And if the priest or the pope won, so the entire town was converted to Christianity. And if you didn't accept that, they would kill you.
There were like public disputations of
Right.
Torah.
There are very famous ones, right? That's okay. So let's take a quick look what was going on in the Middle Ages. Let's read the introduction because it's
Okay.
interesting.
In 1348-49, Europe was struck by the Black Death, which estimated to wipe out as much as a third of the continent's population.
That's huge, right? So it's a third of the continent. It's
Okay. Anti-Semites accused the Jews of having caused the plague by poisoning the wells. In community throughout Europe, Jews were offered the choice of conversion to Christianity or death. Tens of thousands of Jews refused to convert and were murdered, including 6,000 Jews in Mainz, Germany, and 2,000 in Strasbourg, France, who were burned on a wooden scaffold in a Jewish cemetery.
this is horrible. Right?
Medieval Chronicles account describes the manner in which the martyrs of Nordhausen, Germany, met their deaths. They asked the burghers to permit them to prepare themselves for martyrdom. Permission having been given, they joyfully arrayed themselves in their prayer shawls and shrouds, both men and women. They, the Christians, dug a grave at the cemetery and covered it with wooden scaffolding. The pious ones among the Jews asked that a musician be hired to play dancing tunes so they should enter the presence of God with singing. They took each other by the hand, both men and women, and danced and leapt with their whole strength before God. Their teacher, Rabbi Jacob, went before them. His son, Rabbi Meir, brought up the rear to see that none should lag behind. Singing and dancing, they entered the grave, and when all had entered, Rabbi Meir jumped out and walked around to make certain that none had stayed outside. When the burghers saw him, they asked him to save his life by apostasy. He answered, "This now is the end of our troubles. You see me only for a while, and then I shall be no more." He returned to the grave. They set fire to the scaffolding. They all of them died together, and not a cry was heard.
Okay, so this is horrible, right? And you know, some people view or see Judaism in this light, in the light of suffering. And some people say, we, the Jewish people, have suffered so much, right? So why should I continue being a Jew, right? Or why should I continue with my religion? For some people, this is a source of living religion, saying, you know what, religions are a source of conflict and death and rivalry between people. I don't like religion anymore. But for others, it's a source of strengthening their faith, right? They say, you know what, if our ancestors were willing to give up their lives, so we that live in a free country where we can freely and openly exercise our faith, we should continue with our Judaism even more, right? So both ways. But when you read things like this, you say, God, why there is so much suffering for the Jewish people? And it's all across, right? And then we're going to read about the Holocaust, and we're going to read about Russia.
I can't believe that the Jews walked into the gas chambers not knowing what was going to happen to them. I mean, I think they knew that this was going to be their death. And they walked in
They did know,
peacefully.
because right at the gate, some other Jews say, when they ask what is this smoke, they
Showers.
say, this is for you. That's what they emphasize.
Yeah.
There was no secret.
And I think when they were transported to the concentration camps, they already knew, and they heard, you know, from others who were there, or
But that
you know,
was
they were-
later on.
Yeah, no, of course, of course.
Not right away.
Of course, yeah, of course.
But even later on, if you read in Night, I mean, that's 1944 when he was transported, they still believed, they didn't know, or at least he didn't know where they were going. They didn't believe the stories that they had heard.
Yeah,
Because the stories were so horrible.
so horrible.
Right.
There were
No one
two
could even
Jews
imagine, right,
left,
that this could be true.
Escaped from Auschwitz, and they went to Czechoslovakia and told the Jewish agency.
What was
and,
going on.
And in the beginning, they didn't believe them.
Right.
Didn't
They
believe
say it's impossible.
Who would
Yeah.
be so cruel?
The
So,
Romans.
so there are a number of stories here about the Holocaust. Let's just read the short one because we have only 5 more minutes, and then I want to get to Sharansky because I think it's interesting. Okay, so during the Holocaust, here 3:24. Let's do it. Let my death
be an energetic cry of protest against the indifference of the world, which witnesses the extermination of the Jewish people without taking any steps to prevent it. In our day and age, human life is of little value. Having failed to achieve success in my life, I hope that my death may jolt the indifference of those who, perhaps even in this extreme movement, could save the Jews who are still alive in Poland.
right. So what
And he killed himself.
Yeah, you can see it here. He was a Polish Jew who escaped to England, where he tried to raise support for his country's Jews who were being murdered by the Nazis. But many people did not hear, you know, or they didn't want to hear, or they just didn't want to help others, right? And didn't want to help the Jews. So here and during the Holocaust, we know people who were singing, you know, Ani Maamin, for example, when they were forced into the gas chambers. And we know poems and things that are lines that are written on the walls of the concentration camps, and even some paints that are on the walls, right? So we know that some people were willing to give up their lives for or sanctifying the name of God. And you have stories about observing Passover, right, in the ghetto. Or there's a story here about observing Yom Kippur in a concentration camp, right? Or there are stories about lighting candles on a Friday evenings before Shabbos, right? And many stories about how Jews try to keep the mitzvot regardless of the horrible circumstances where they were in the concentration camps
But
or
that
in the
was the
ghetto.
exception.
No, but then they were killed.
Yeah, but most people just thought of survival and not about.
Yeah, yeah. So the long one, you can take it home. It's a horrible one. It's very hard. So you can take it home and you can read it there. But I want to get to Natan Sharansky, and it's on page 327. Let's take a look.
5 years ago, I submitted my application for exit visa to Israel. Now I am further than ever from my dream. This would seem to be a cause for regret, but it's absolutely otherwise. I am happy. I am happy that I lived honestly in peace with my conscience. I never compromised my soul, even under the threat of death. For more than 2,000 years, the Jewish people, my people, have been dispersed. But wherever they are, wherever Jews are found each year, they've repeated next year in Jerusalem. Now when I am further than ever from my people, from Avital, my wife, facing many arduous years of imprisonment, I say, turning to my people, my Avital, next year in Jerusalem, and I turn to you, the court, who were required to confirm a predetermined sentence to you. I have nothing to say.
Right. So you know Sharansky's story, do you? Yeah.
Yeah.
That he was sent to Siberia, I believe, right? And he was there for a number of years, and so let's take a. It says here, Natan Sharansky last speech in 1978 before the Soviet court that sentenced him to 13 years imprisonment on a false accusation of spying for the United States. The charge had carried with it the possibility of a death sentence. Sharansky was incarcerated for 16 months before his trial, and despite being subjected to psychological and physical torture, he refused to confess until Sharansky's release from prison in 1986. In response to tremendous international efforts largely organized by Avital, his wife, many Jews read Sharansky's final statement to the court at their Passover Seder. Sharansky's entire speech is reprinted in his remarkable autobiography, Fear No Evil. Right? So even only a few years ago, because this happened in 1978, Jews were not able to freely follow their religion or to fulfill the command, the mitzvot, right? So, and people stood up against it. And you have this example of Sharansky, who was willing to put his life at risk in order to, I don't know if it sanctifies God's name, but at least for the continuity of Judaism and the Jewish people. So the question is, how do we make sense of this suffering? How do we make sense of these four stories that we read from different periods in time, that they have a common factor? And the common factor is how hard it is to be a Jew, right? And how hard it is when you have to give up your life to follow the mitzvot or to sanctify God's name. And again, some people would say, you know what? And a number of people stopped believing in God or following Judaism after the Shoah, after the Holocaust. And they said, how could I continue believing in a God that would enable things like this to happen?
Was last
And
time discussion here.
yeah, and then some others said, you know what? Otherwise, I have to strengthening my Judaism. And because of them, I would continue fulfilling the mitzvot and my communal participation and being engaged in my religion. So I think that those are the main two responses to Jewish suffering, or this idea of Kiddush Hashem. So how do you feel about it?
You're too young to remember, but many of us here remember all the work to go to free Soviet Jewry.
Mm-hmm.
We had.
Well, I was two.
Yeah. I counted back, but we had rallies, we had marches up and down the Park Avenue. We sent busloads of people, our kids included, to Washington to march to free Sharansky. There was a speaker at the Jewish Community Center from Boston was a jeweler, and he said, you know, when I first heard it, I thought it was Save Soviet Jewelry.
Soviet jewelry.
Oh, it was Save Soviet
Of course, jewelry.
But the world listened, and our government had strong enough force that led to the freedom of so many
But
Soviet
let me
Jews.
ask you a question.
Yeah.
Do you think that in the environment of today, here and in Europe, and maybe other places,
That-
would the Jews rise up and support the suffering Jews
Elsewhere?
someplace else?
Oh yeah, of course.
Yeah,
Look
I
what's
think
going
so.
on in Venezuela today. I just read this week that a number of Venezuelans who live in Venezuela, Jews who lives in Venezuela, they want to go to Israel because of the horrible conditions that are
but
going
that's
on there.
different. I ask if the
If people
Jews
here-
living in a
if-
free
in-
world like here
Right.
would come and rise
And support.
and support and go to the government and try to put pressure in order to rescue the Jews from
Venezuela.
Venezuela and other places. I have a little bit doubt today because so many Jews, I don't know if that's selfish or I don't know how to find the reason, but not thinking of Judaism in the same way as during the bad time.
I think
But
that
the
Time is
also
too
is
good today.
Would the governments of America, the United States, and of Europe, for example, listen to that kind of a protest?
I would hope that
Well,
we
I
would
don't
be
know.
there would be enough of us that would be able to do that, because Yael, in the 1980s there were Jews who hid their Jewishness, who
No, but look in the colleges. How many Jews in colleges come up and support be
BDS.
against anti-Semitism? Relatively very few. The others say, "Hey, my life, I need to get education. I don't want to get involved." I think that the atmosphere, not it was bad at that time, so you get together and you rise up. It's good today. So people are more selfish. That's the way I see it.
I'll tell you
I hope I'm
the way
wrong.
the way I see
They're
it.
not educated enough.
The way, the way I see it is,
Yeah.
as long as we have the state of Israel, this is not going to happen again.
But there are
think-
many Jews that don't care
I
much
thi-
for the state
Yeah, but
of
I
Israel too.
think that the state of Israel reassures that Jews will be safe around the world.
I'm sure you're right, but I'm sure also that many Jews around the world don't care about Israel. Only when they need Israel, then they care.
Yeah, some of them, but some others do
many
care.
Just, you know, the
And,
Jews are
and I
big
think
also.
that the state of Israel would take care not only of Israeli citizens but of Jews around the world.
sure.
I have full confidence of the state of Israel, but not full confidence of the diaspora Jews.
Well, and we know this friction that exists, right, between Israel and the diaspora, and
Yeah,
what's going on
that's
right
a
now.
That's part of it.
Right.
Yeah.
But even this story about the Holocaust that I had never heard before, about the Jew who wasn't openly Jewish and was the guard, you know, in the end, he rose up and got killed.
Yep.
Because he wouldn't eat on Yom Kippur.
Right.
Though,
Right.
you
Right.
know.
But my feeling is that because we have a strong state of Israel, and we have Tzahal, and we have strong Medinat Israel, things like this, I hope, will not happen.
I hope so too. Don't
Right. Yeah.
misunderstand me.
Right. But she doesn't know if.
But my feeling is that not enough Jewish people support Israel. They find what's wrong about
The next
Israel.
generation.
Yeah.
What
Wait a
the
minute.
next
The next
generation?
generation.